liberator, but you can't murder liberation. You can murder revolutionary, but you can't murder revolution. And you can murder a freedom fighter, but you can't murder freedom.
You're tapped in, so let's get right to it. Just recently, I did some content on Marco Rubio, Department of State head, and a speech he gave on Thursday, a speech that a lot of us find very disturbing. Also that day, Stephen Miller had stepped on the podium after Marco Rubio and gave a speech that was even more disturbing. I have that clip. I'm going to show you this clip so that you guys can get a bar of what's being said. More than that, more than what's being said, so you guys can get an understanding, become aware of what's happening, not what's about to happen, but what is actually happening in the streets of America. Okay. So, excuse me, Stephen Miller declared that the United States has formally recognized left-wing violence as terrorism, framing it as a direct threat to the national security and the survival of the republic's form of government. Okay, now I have to jump in here right quick because see, then that's saying anyone who has a constitutional right to overthrow the government, to rise up against the government, if the people should see or feel, think, know that the government is not working in its best interest, they have the right constitutionally to replace it. To replace it. What we're hearing from Marco Rubio and Stephen Miller is that that right is going to be stripped from us, because those who are in power, those who think that there's a threat to their national security and their survival, of what they think the republic's form of government is, should be, and should not change, they're going to do something about it. Those people who feel threatened by people speaking out against corruption, inequity, egregious behavior and acts by the government, they think that's a threat. And for those individuals who are speaking up and out against said, policies and corrupt forms of government, and just a disgraceful presentation or behavior of heads of state, presidents, and so forth, you're going to be targeted. Your right to fight oppression, to fight against a government that is unjust, is being stripped from you as I speak. So Stephen Miller announced that Trump's NSPM 7 directs law enforcement and intelligence agencies to disrupt, to identify, to defund, to debank, arrest, and persecute alleged political terrorists operating domestically. So what that means? That means then you won't have the right to protest. You won't have the right to stand against apartheid, to stand against genocide, to stand against fascism, to stand against police brutality, to stand against a corrupt government. You won't have that right. They're about to take that right. And make no mistake about it, they might even say or use, well, they didn't use political terrorist groups, far left extremist groups, and they said in their speech, look, this will be directed at individuals as well. So what I'm saying is anybody who might be, let's say, Black Lives Matter, about that, about pro-Palestine, about that, anti-Israel, about that, anti-fascism, about that, anti-police, anti-corruption, or anti-corrupt, or against corrupt governments, you are putting your freedom at risk. They are threatening to disrupt you, to identify you, to defund you, to debank you, arrest you, and persecute you. So what does this remind anyone of? Those movements of the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Those movements. See, what we fail to miss is that a lot of what was accomplished back then is slowly being stripped away and replaced, erased. You know, a lot of people aren't paying attention to this, but that's exactly what's happening. See, those protests from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, they evolved over time. Yet they became extreme because they were dealing with extreme forces. And this is what you see today. You see protests now becoming extreme because these protesters, these groups, they are seeing extreme police forces at work. And I mean extreme to the extent of unaliving people. We see this happening in the streets. Footage, there are receipts. And the government is saying, so what? If you are against us, if you're against what we're doing, then we're going to disrupt you, identify you, defund you, debank you, arrest you, and prosecute you. All right? On alleged political terrorist operations. All right? Now, they said defund and debank, and we have to pay attention what's happening in the banks. The banks are getting more power over your money. They have a new digital system in place to where, in due time, when you go to withdraw money for a bill or whatever, you know, the bank will have discretion as to whether or not they're going to let you withdraw that money. So if they have that ability, then that means then also the government has the ability to tap in with the bank and say, hey, we need you guys to put a freeze or hold, on this individual's account or this group's or organization's account because we think they're involved in terrorism. The bank's going to do exactly that. All this stuff is happening for a reason. None of this stuff is coincidental. None of it. But anyway, Stephen Miller went on to say, very scary stuff. Very scary stuff. He says he argued that left-wing political terrorism's ultimate goal is overthrowing the current system of government. But again, isn't that within the Constitution? Can't that be something people can use as a constitutional exercise? He also warned that if left unchecked, this trajectory inevitably leads to a gulag, mass imprisonment, stripping of rights, and rule through terror. And use that warning to justify preemptive action rather than describing an already imminent threat, according to Truth Out's characterization of his remarks. So there's a lot of criticism in terms of what Marco Rubio and Stephen Miller has said since Thursday. A lot of people are calling it an attempt at fascism in the country. A lot of people are under the impression, well, Trump's going to walk away in 2 years or less than, people aren't really looking at this thing correctly. And let's say, for instance, Trump does walk away, but you know what's going to be left in his wake? Everything he's establishing right now, or everything he's being told and directed to establish right now. It will still be there. Trump can die tomorrow, and if it was already in place, so what? He's gone, but that will be in place, So we have to start looking at this as we should, through the lens of the people, and not the lens of, corrupt politicians, tyrants, fascists. No. Multiple outlets note this framing runs counter to research. Former officials and researchers say the far left threat doesn't approach the scale of that the scale of ISIS or far-right extremism. And far-right violence was reportedly omitted from the administration's own counterterrorism strategy, and that would have been the 2026 Counterterrorism Act. All right, they were left out of that altogether, but they did mention far left extremism. They did mention anti-Israel. They did mention anti-fascism. They did mention pro-Palestine. They did mention pro-BLM. That they're telling you guys what they're doing, what's happening. ICE isn't there, man, just for the sole purpose of finding, catching up, deporting immigrants. The FBI, DEA, the ATF, they're all out there already together. Stephen Miller is just another individual to send the message, let you guys know what's about to occur, what's occurring. Excuse me, not what is about to occur, but what is actually happening in real time. All right. So yeah, this is what's happening. All right. Let me get to this clip because I'm telling you, it's frightening enough to make you want to act and prepare, because they're telling you they're already prepared. Let's get to this clip. Before I do, as always, please like, share, follow, comment, and subscribe. You are tapped in. This is the art of political discourse. Okay. Let's get to this clip. Crazy work is what we say nowadays.
Good morning, distinguished leaders and guests. It's good to see so many familiar faces. And thank you, of course, to Secretary of State Rubio for organizing this conference and for leading this initiative. Here in the United States, we have taken the necessary and essential action of formally recognizing left-wing violence as a form of political terrorism that is a direct threat to our national security and the survival of our Republican form of government. President Trump issued a directive. In our parlance, it's called a National Security Presidential Memorandum, or NSPM, NSPM 7 to be exact, that directs, for the first time in American history, all of our law enforcement and intelligence agencies to work together to disrupt, identify, defund, debank, arrest, and prosecute these political terrorists that are operating in our country. It's very important to understand that left-wing political terrorism seeks as its ultimate end the overthrow of our system and form of government. And we've seen this has taken place many times.
Is that unconstitutional? And especially if these are American citizens partaking in this activity to overthrow a government that, based upon what the Constitution says, they have a right to do, unless now the Constitution really has no teeth. Unless the Constitution really carries no weight.
Many times in many places throughout the years, and Secretary Rubio has provided you many examples.
Dude, guess how much it cost me to make sure my family gets $1 million if something ever happens to me?
Left-wing terrorism always ends in bloodshed, misery, and suffering. It only can travel in one direction. There's no point at which the left-wing terrorist is satisfied with his gains and ceases progressing. Inevitably, left to run its course, it always becomes a gulag. It always becomes the mass imprisonment of political enemies, the stripping of their rights and freedoms, inflicting immense pain, humiliation, suffering, in order to establish complete and total control. Control through psychological and physical.
And again, I just said this on the piece we just did with Marco Rubio. What he's referencing, what he's alluding to, what he's speaking about, it sounds to me that he's talking about the government he's representing, the administration, or the people who runs that administration, is who he's talking about, who he's discussing. I can't get that impression out of my mind. You're talking literally about yourselves.
Physical and actual terror. And we have to understand that that is the scope and the extent of the threat that we face. And as Secretary Rubio also pointed out, this is an international network. Antifa, as an example, operates in dozens of countries all throughout the world. They share common networks of funding, organization, and information sharing. And so all of our intelligence agencies and law enforcement entities should be collaborating and coordinating and working together in order to root out these organizations. One of the hallmarks of left-wing violence and terrorism is its completely pretextual and disingenuous appeal to civil liberties in an effort to shield its own violence. This is the tactic that the left always uses to try to protect itself from facing criminal punishment. It is essential that we are wise enough and strong enough to understand that these appeals must fall on deaf ears. When the leftist, who does not believe in freedom, who does not believe in civil rights, who does not believe in any ordered notion of justice, protests that we are violating his rights, understand that he is lying to try to persuade people who are not closely following the political scene that some injustice has been perpetrated against him.
I mean, isn't that Donald Trump? Isn't that the whole Trump administration? All right. Isn't that those who prop up Trump, who Trump, whose bidding Trump does? Isn't that those guys? Isn't that them?
We must stay the course and be completely unflinching in the pursuit of justice against these enemies of civilization.
I don't know how to interpret that. In other words, oh my God, it's like he's saying, no matter what we do, just stay the course. Because, going to be some things done, and don't get weak on us. Don't get soft on us. That's the impression I just got. There's some things we're going to have to do, and by God, we're going to do them. But hey, don't back out. Don't back down. Don't be weak.
If the left is allowed to use the real or actual threat of violence to destabilize our institutions, then those institutions cannot and will not succeed. So here in the United States, for example, we saw in the recent past clear threats of violence against our Supreme Court to try to shape how they rule on upcoming decisions. The leftist does this with the full desire, intent, and understanding that the threat of violence against a public figure or their family is meant to cow them into behaving or acting or conducting themselves differently.
Uh-oh. Sorry, everybody. I seem to have lost volume here. Don't know what that's about.
This kind of violence can fester as a cancer and ultimately destroy a society. Nothing that we do works if the threat of violence and terror goes on unchecked. Our political systems don't work, our judicial systems don't work, our legal systems don't work, our jury trials don't work. And at the same time, we have to understand there's a real threat that those who are not themselves terrorists, but who support left-wing violence, will create the conditions that allow that violence to go on without any meaningful inhibition. So
they're saying not just the so-called far left extremists, but anybody who could possibly be affiliated with them, know them, related to them, married, or just support them, in concept and ideology, not necessarily action, could also be thrown in the gulag or arrested, is what Stevens said. Arrested, identified, defunded, debanked, harassed.
to be specific, we've seen some of our nation's cities in America, like Washington, D.C. and New York City, something, again, it's an American term, but it's known as jury nullification. This is when a person is obviously guilty of a crime, but the juror, because they're ideologically sympathetic to the perpetrator, will not sentence them to the crime for which they've obviously committed. We've seen in the United States, again and again, individuals who are part of left-wing organizations who've committed assaults against ICE officers or federal law enforcement who've been brought to court where clear evidence has been presented against them, that the jury has refused to convict for purely political reasons. When you've reached that point, it demonstrates how deeply the cancer has begun to infest your society. Where people have created an internal rationalization structure to justify.
People. I hope you guys are really listening to this guy. So that means then we may see jurors being picked as part of, a defendant's constitutional right to pick a jury of his peers removed. That's one. Two, juries, the way they're talking, can actually be coerced or threatened to vote a certain way in a case or trial that may have a sitting defendant as a left-wing extremist. You convict him, or we're gonna, this is some crazy work. Listen to what Stephen Miller is saying.
Unsanctioned violence against the state and state actors to achieve a political end. We have to use every lawful and legitimate tool that we have to demonstrate.
Notice he said lawful,
that justice,
and then legitimate. Lawful and legitimate, they aren't the same. All right. See, because there are some legitimate tactics being used, but they aren't right. They aren't lawful. You know what I mean? But we see corrupt individuals using legitimate processes, practices, and things of that nature to accomplish certain things. And only then, when it goes before maybe SCOTUS, Supreme Court, it gets shot down. Say, hey, that's not lawful. It's not constitutional. Can't have both.
this will be served and delivered, and to prove that these kinds of tactics and techniques will ultimately fail. If the leftist learns and observes that their violence and criminal activity helps and ultimately succeeds in achieving their desired political end, they will be endlessly emboldened. Here in the United States, we've seen a growing.
And this is what we see in the Trump administration, because they have been given what seems to be free reign. They're every day they seem more and more emboldened to do what they want to do and not do what the law says. They do what they consider to be legitimate. Pay attention, people.
And deeply alarming increase in attempted assassinations against public figures. Most notably, of course, the multiple assassination attempts against President Trump, the successful assassination attempt against Charlie Kirk, many others.
My name is Jay Prang, 55 years old, from Atlanta, Georgia. I think as you get older, you do tend to have trouble with sleep.
We tend to think that those, what they call assassination attempts, were nothing but staged. They were farces. They were fake. Charlie Kirk, man, however, may be something totally different, but hey, Charlie Kirk, right? Yeah, this thing about Trump being, targeted, for assassination, we see as a bunch of hogwash, slop. We don't trust it. We don't believe it for a second. We think it's all staged. That's what we think about that, And that is also just a bid for him to change some laws so that he is able to do what they think is or will be legitimate to do,
Is a fatal cancer to civilization. And the greatest risk that we have is that our institutions have grown too soft and too cowardly to be able to defend themselves against a mortal threat. If your civilization is your home, you must defend it with the same passion and force as if an enemy intruder is inside your own house where your family lives. That is the level of dedication and urgency.
This sounds so Zionistic, right? This sounds like some Zionists, some Ashkenazi Zionist rhetoric, to justify coming massacres, displacement, incarceration, detainment, abuse, torture. This is what this sounds like. This is what this will actually be if this is allowed to go forward.
That is required. And the greatest threat is that even though there are far more of us, there are far more people who believe in order and civilization and liberty and the rule of law.
Yeah, and that's why they're fighting against the Trump administration and his backers, the super rich, the 1%, those who run everything and decide what's what in the world, on the world, those who are taking over all the water rights, those who are creating, manufacturing food, those who control the purse strings of people, Yeah.
Is that
you guys aren't too smart. And there are not as many of you or as there is many of them who are against you. You're wrong.
if we are softer than those who seek to end us, then the smaller but more radical minority will succeed. It is easy to dismiss what I'm saying and to say, surely it cannot be that bad. It cannot be that dire. But again, I point to the examples in our own country.
Well, listen, we understand a lot of things, better than Stephen Miller think we do. Yeah, they will be a minority very, very soon, and that's scary to them. That's scary to them. They see that as a threat to their power, to their structure, and they're looking to do something about that. They're looking to prepare for that. All right. Again, the rhetoric we're hearing from Stephen Miller, that we heard from Marco Rubio, is disturbing, very disturbing. We're talking about fascism here. We're talking about fascists who want to push an agenda to make everyone who don't think like them feel threatened or make them disappear. This is what we're talking about. We're talking about those who have all the power and control, realizing that there are many, many more of us who are seeing this picture for the first time. And that picture is corruptness. It's uncivilized. There's nothing civilized about what we see coming out of those who have all the money and power in the world. Nothing civilized about it. This is the Epstein class. In fact, it's the lower tier. There are higher tiers or rungs on that ladder. Epstein was just probably, at the middle of it or probably at the bottom. They're protecting how they do things. See, the hammer's coming down. There are demands being made about, again, the Epstein files. Hey, who are you guys protecting? And those who they're protecting must remain protected. How do you stop this then? It means you got to get control of those who are asking the questions, those who are willing to go to the streets and say, hey, no, we demand answers. You control that by saying, okay, we're going to outlaw this. We're going to make this a crime. We're going to identify you. We're going to defund you, debank you, arrest you, prosecute you, capture you, torture you, and anybody that's down with you. That's what this is. That's what this is. Make no mistake about it.
Where, for example, our immigration and customs enforcement, which is...
What is ICE doing in the streets? A lot of us, melanated, of the melanated persuasion, really, had no problem with what's going on because we told people, right? But at the same time, we see what's happening to them. They're being gunned down in the streets. Gunned down. Unarmed. The fascists are already here. You know, ICE, FBI, DEA, ATF, they're already here. IDF, they're already here. All right, everybody.
Been duly statutory authorized to carry out routine enforcement of immigration law, has been subjected to an over 8,000% increase in violent assaults. These are not one-off episodes. This is repeat, systemic, organized, funded insurrection and armed resistance against the federal.
So then does that mean you're going to go after state governments, city governments? Because, you know, most of them actually are verbally, you know, just out and out against, you know, these policies. And yet they support the people who are supporting the immigrants. So I wonder how that's going to look. How you know, does martial law at some point come into play? Do you come in the cities and you federalize the police force? I mean, how does this work? Do you unseat the, you know, the governor, the mayor, you know, your city council, your city assembly? How does this work? Very interesting.
Government. There was a sniper from a sniper's nest who, using an assault rifle, tried to shoot ICE officers in Dallas, Texas. These are the episodes that we're talking about, where we have had repeated, direct, violent attacks on federal law enforcement in order to veto the ballot box with violence. And the leftist justifies this violence to himself by saying that they alone are the arbiters of what is right or wrong.
No, we thought that was the Trump administration, and they set out to prove that they are the arbiters of what is right and wrong. And if you don't like it, go to hell. You know, I've about had enough of this. We've listened long enough of this. Can be found on PBS. Okay, this could CNN, you know, and other stations as well. This is Stephen Miller, and again, you guys, it's already here. It's already here, and a lot of what they're saying they're gonna do, they're actually already doing. So, you know, we asked the question last week, earlier this week actually, and we asked our viewers, "Are you ready? Are you prepared for what's coming down the pipes? Are you ready for what's already happening? Are you ready to lose whatever rights you think you may have?" Ask yourselves, are you ready? I'm asking, ask yourselves. Now, in the meantime, in between time, those thoughts that you may have revolving around this, concerning this, whether you support it or not, we like to hear what those thoughts are. Put them in the comments. Put them in the comments. Let us get a bar of that. Because here at TAP, you know, we actually trust that, you know, the art of political dialogue, of discourse, man, is something we can all involve ourselves in. We like to hear what you got to say. All right. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. They're coming.
You can murder a liberator, but you can't murder liberation. You can murder a revolutionary, but you can't murder revolution. And you can murder a freedom fighter, but you can't murder freedom.